In this lecture, we will learn what is a query string in a route, how to specify a query string for a route in Angular, and how to retrieve the query string values in Angular. Query strings are the optional data that we can pass to a component through a route. And these query strings are added at the end of the URL separated by a question mark. So for example, in this first URL, you see we have this URL root URL /book/author. After that, we have a question mark. And after the question mark, we are specifying a query string. In this case, the key for the query string is name and the value for that query string is Stephen King. In the same way, we have another URL, root URL /product/product. After that, we are using a question mark. And after that question mark, we are specifying two query strings, the ID query string with the value 12345 and the name query string with the value iPhone. So in order to specify a query string in a route, after the route, we specify a question mark and then we specify the query strings as a key value pair. And we can separate one or more query strings using this AND. Let's try to understand how we can work with query string in Angular. Here we have our Angular application. Now here I will go to this courses link and in there we are displaying all the courses. Now what I want is when a user specify a query string for this courses route, so after the courses route, the user can specify a question mark and then he can specify a query string. For example, here we are going to specify the query string as search. And to this we need to assign a value. Here I will assign JavaScript. So based on this search query string and its value, we want to filter all the courses from this course list. So for example, the value for this search query string is JavaScript. So we want to filter all the courses whose name contains JavaScript in it. For that, what we need to do is we need to read the value of search query string. Let's see how we can do that. So for that, we need to go to the courses component because here the route is root URL /courses. Okay, and after that we have this query string, but keep in mind that query string is not a part of route. The route here is root URL /courses. And for this route, if you remember, let's go to app-module.ts. So for that route, for root URL /courses, we are displaying the view of courses component. So here, let's open courses component. Before that, I'll close this course detail component. And let's go to courses component. So here we have our courses component.ts. In there, I'm going to write ng on init lifecycle hook. And since we are using this ng on init lifecycle hook here, I'm also going to implement on init interface for this courses component class. For that, we can use this implements keyword and we want to implement on init interface. And in order to use this on init interface, we also need to import it from angular/go. All right. And here the name of the lifecycle hook is ng on init with is caps. All right. Now inside this ng on init lifecycle hook, I am going to write the logic to read the value of query string. Here we want to read the value of search query string. So in the web page, we are specifying the query string as search. So we want to read the value of this search query string. For that, let's go back to VS Code. And again, in order to read the value from a route, we need an instance of activated route class because the activated route class instance will contain the information about the currently active route. So here we want Angular to inject an instance of activated route class. For that, first I will create a property. I'll call it active route. You can name it anything. The type here is going to be activated route. And in order to use this activated route, we also need to import it from Angular/router. So let's write that import statement. Okay. Now we want Angular to inject an instance of this activated route class inside this courses component class. For that, I'm going to use inject method to ask Angular to inject an instance of this activated route class. So to this inject method, we will pass the type name, which in this case is activated route. So in this way, inside this property, we will have an instance of activated route class. Now let's access this activated route instance inside this ng on init. For that, let's say this dot active route dot, and again on this we have the snapshot property, and on this snapshot property we have query param property, and to this query param property we need to pass the name of the query string. In this case, the name of the query string is going to be search. So this line here, it will return us the value of search query string from the route. Now we can go ahead and we can store it in a variable, but here instead of storing it in a variable, I'm going to create a property. I'll call it search string. It is going to be of type string, and here let's say this dot search string equals whatever value this search query string is storing. And let's also go ahead and let's log it in the console. So here I want to log this dot search string. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page. Let me open developer console. Let me clear developer console here. And now let me go ahead and let me make a new request to this URL. So if I press enter, you see JavaScript has been logged because the value of search here is JavaScript. If I say Angular, and again if I make a new request, in that case Angular has been logged. But if I specify nothing here, so for example if I specify empty string and if I press enter, in that case you can see an empty string has been logged here. And if I specify nothing, so if I don't specify any query string here, and if I press enter, then the value for that search query string is undefined. Now what I want is when the user specifies this search query string with some value, let's say JavaScript, in that case we want to filter all the courses whose name contains JavaScript in it. For that, let's go back to VS Code, and there I will move this line. So here I have created this all courses property. So it is going to contain all the courses. Now, instead of initializing it here, what I will do is here I will write an if statement, and there I will check if this dot search string, let me copy this, if it is equal to undefined or if it is equal to empty string. So I'll say this dot search string, if it is equal to empty string, in that case we want to display all the courses. So for that I will search this dot all courses to this dot course service dot courses. Let me cut it from here, and here I will not initialize it. Instead I will initialize it here. Otherwise, if this search string has some value, so let's also write this else condition. In that case, what we want to do is we want to set this dot all courses equals, and we want to filter those courses from this courses array whose name contains JavaScript in it. So let me copy this line. So this is going to return us all the courses. From that courses, we want to filter those courses whose name contains the value of the search string. So here I'll say x such that x dot title dot includes, and then we are going to pass the value stored in this search string property. So here we will say this dot search string. Okay, and this filter method, it is going to return an array with all the filtered courses with the given search string, and we are assigning it back to this all courses. Let's see if this works or not. So let's save the changes here. Let's go back to the web page, and here let me go ahead and let me make a new request with this search value as JavaScript. If I press enter, you see, it is displaying nothing here. It is not displaying any courses. That's because this JavaScript has everything in lowercase. But in the course name, we have J in caps and S in caps. So before doing the comparison, what we will also do is we'll say title dot to lowercase, and then this search string also we will convert it to lowercase before comparing. Okay, and let me move these things in a separate line so that it will be more visible. All right, with this, let's save the changes. Let's go back to the web page. And now you will notice that the course with this name JavaScript is displayed here. If I say Angular and if I press enter, then only those courses whose name contains Angular in it that has been displayed here. But if I specify nothing, in that case, it should display all the courses, as you can see. And if I don't specify any query string, simply type root URL / courses. In that case also, it should display all the courses. Okay, so in this way, using this snapshot property and on that query params, we can read the value of a query parameter. Now, instead of query params, we can also use query param map. So let's also see that. Let me copy this line and I will comment it. And now, instead of using query params, we will use query param map. And since we are using map, in order to get the value from this map, we need to use get method. And to that get method, we need to pass the query string name. Here, the name of the query string is search. Okay, so this should also work. Let's save the changes. Let's go back to the web page. And here, if I type courses only, it is not displaying anything. Let's open developer console. So you see, in this case, when we are using query param map, in that case, when we are not specifying the query string, in that case, instead of returning undefined, it is returning null. But in case of query params, it returned undefined. So here, instead of checking undefined, we need to check null. But what we will do is we will write another OR statement. So here I'll say OR, and let me copy this condition and let's paste it here. And here we will also check for null. Okay, with this, let's save the changes. Let's go back to the web page. And now it is displaying all the courses when we are not setting any query parameter. But if I say courses and then after that, if I specify the search query string, if I don't specify any value for the search query string, in that case, it will be empty string. So in that case also, it should show all the courses. But if I say, let's say React, and if I press enter, it should display only those courses whose name contains React in it. So in this way, we can read the value of a query parameter using query param map or query params on this snapshot property. All right, now here we are reading the value. But what we also want is, if I go to home page, and here we have this search box. So what I want is when the user enters something inside this search box, let's say JavaScript, and when he clicks on this search course button, we want to redirect the user to the courses page. And based on the text which the user has entered inside this text box, we want to filter the courses and display it. For that, what we are going to do is, let's go to the place where we are displaying this search box. And we are displaying this search box in the home component. So let me expand home component. In there, we have this banner component. And in that banner component, we have that button. So here what we want is when this button is clicked, we want to redirect user to the courses page. And in that route, in that courses route, we want to add a query string. Now, how can we add a query string? Let's see that. For that, on this button element, I'm going to add router link directive. And here I'm going to bind this router link directive. And here, when the user clicks on this button, I want to redirect the user to / courses page. And with this route, I also want to append some query string. So here I'll say question mark, and then I'll specify this search query string equal to, and then to this search query string, we want to assign the value which the user has typed inside this input element. For that, on this input element, I'm going to add a template reference variable. I'll simply call it search where, you can call it anything. And from this search where template reference variable, we are going to get the value which the user has entered inside this search box. So here after this, I'll use a plus because here I want to concatenate two strings, and I'll use a set of parentheses, and inside that I'll say search where it is going to store this input element There we are going to have a target property, and on that target property we will have a value property, and this should give us the value which the user has typed inside the search text box. Let's see if this works. Let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page, and here we have an error, and it says searchware.target.value does not exist on the input element. That's because it should not be target.value but simply template reference variable name dot value, because this variable, it is going to store a reference of this input element, and on that input element we can directly call the value property. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go back to the web page. So we don't have any error, and now you can see JavaScript course has been filtered. If I say Angular here and if I press enter, it should filter the Angular course. Okay, let me go back to home page. Here, let me type JavaScript and let me click on this search button. So when I click on that search button, it is not displaying the value properly, because if you see, the URL is not correct. So after the courses, we should have a question mark, then the search query string equal to, and then the value. But this route here, it is not proper. Because of that only we are getting this 404 page not found. Now why is that? That's because the way we are specifying the query parameter here, that is not correct. So we cannot specify a query parameter using this router link. Using this router link, we can only specify the route, and the route is going to be root URL/courses. So let's remove this query parameter from here, because this is not the way in which we should be specifying the query parameter. Now, in order to specify the query parameter for this route, we need to use another directive called as query params. Okay, and this query params, it is also an attribute directive. So let's wrap it within square brackets, and to that we need to assign an object. And in that object, we can specify the query parameters as a key value pair. So here we only want one query parameter called search, and to that we want to assign the value which the user has typed inside this search input box. So to get that value, we can say searchware dot value. Again, in order to specify the query parameter, we use this query params directive. To that, we assign an object, and in that object, we specify the query string name and its value. Here, we are reading the value from the search input box. Now, if you want to specify another query parameter, all you have to do is you have to use a comma, you have to specify a key, for example, name, and then you have to specify a value, for example, John. Okay, so you can specify multiple query strings separated by comma inside this object. But here we need only one query string. So I'm only going to specify this search query string. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go back to the web page. Let's go to home page, and now let me type JavaScript. And if I click on this search button, we are redirected to this courses page. But there you will notice that for this search string, we don't have any value. It is empty string. And because of that, it is showing all the courses here. But if I go ahead and if I specify a value, for example, JavaScript, so here I'm hard coding the value. If I save the changes, if I go back to the web page, let's go to home page. Here, if I don't type anything, anyway, the query string will be JavaScript, right? So when I click on this search course button, you see the query string value is JavaScript, and based on that, we have the filtered course here. But for some reason, when I'm using template reference variable dot value, it is returning us empty string. So what we will do is, instead of specifying this query parameter here, we will specify the query parameter in the TypeScript class. And that is also possible. So we can specify the query parameter in the template using this query params directive. And we can also specify the query parameter in the component class. Let's see how we can do that. So let me remove this line from here. And instead of writing it like this, what we will do is, here we will bind click event on this button. And when this click event happens, we want to call a method maybe on search clicked. And to this method, we will pass the value which the user has entered inside this search input element. For that, here again, we are going to use this template reference variable. And on that, we are going to call value property. Now let's go to the component class of this banner component. And in there, let's go ahead and let's create a method. And we are calling that method on search clicked. And this method, we know that it is going to receive a value. So I'll simply call it as value. It is going to be of type string. And then I'll first try to log this value just to see what we are getting. So here I'll log this value parameter. Let's save the changes. Let's go back to the web page. Let's go to home page. Let me open developer console here and let me clear everything. Let me type JavaScript and let's click on this search button. So you see JavaScript has been logged and after that null has been logged. So this null, it is being logged from courses component. So there also we have added one console.log statement. So it is being logged from there. Okay, so in this way we are getting the value. Now what we want is, instead of logging the value in the developer console, we want to redirect the user to the courses page with some query string attached to it. For that, we are going to use navigate method of the router class. And to do that, first we need an instance of the router class. So again, here I'll create a property. I'll call it router. It is going to be of type router. And in order to use this router, we need to import it from Angular/router. Okay. And here we want Angular to inject an instance of router class. And again, in order to use this inject method, we also need to import it from Angular/co. And here we want Angular to inject an instance of this router class. And once we have an instance of this router class, what we can do is on that router. So first of all, we need to access that router using this keyword. And on that, we can call navigate method. And to that navigate method, first we need to specify the route. So route here is going to be /courses. Okay. And then we also need to specify the query parameters. So the first argument of this navigate method is an array where we specify the route. And the second argument is an object. And inside that object, we can specify a property called query params. And to that, we can assign an object. And in that object, we can specify all the query strings. So here we want a search query string. And to this, we want to assign this value. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page. Let's go to home page. Here, let's type JavaScript. And let's click on this search course button. And now you will notice that based on the query string, it has filtered the course. Let me close this developer console here. Let's go back to home page again. So when I don't specify anything here and click on this search course, in that case, all the courses are being displayed and the search query string is empty. If I specify some value, for example, Angular, and if I click on this search course, in that case, based on the search string, it is filtering the course and it is displaying it. So this is how we can pass some query string to a route. We have seen how to do that programmatically using this navigate method. And we also saw how we can do it in the view template using query param directive. Now, in the course component, again, in order to read the value of the query parameter, we are using this snapshot property. But the snapshot property will not get updated if the value of the query string changes from within the component. So as we learned in the last lecture, this ng on init lifecycle hook, it will only get called once. So when this will be called, this search string will be set with the initial value which we have passed for the search query string. After that, from within the component, if we change the value of this query parameter, it will not get reflected inside this snapshot property. For example, let's go to courses component.html file. And in there, what I will do is I will add a link. So after we have displayed all the courses, after that, I'll go ahead and I'll add a link. And here I'll simply say show JavaScript courses. Okay, and on this, I'm going to add a router link. So it is going to be /courses. And I'm also going to add query params. To this, I'm going to assign an object. In that object, I'm going to specify a search query string, and the value here I'll specify as JavaScript. So when this link will be clicked, we want to show all the JavaScript courses. Okay, if I save the changes, let's go to the web page. So we should have a link here, show JavaScript courses. So let me first go to this home page. There, I will search for React. I'll click on this search courses button. Okay, so in the URL, you can see that the query string value is React. The query string is search and its value is React. Now, when I click on this show JavaScript courses, the value of this search query string should change to JavaScript and it should display the JavaScript course here. Let's see if that's the case. So when I click on this show JavaScript courses, you will notice that in the URL, the value of search query string has changed to JavaScript, but we are not seeing the JavaScript course here. Why is that? That's because, again, since we have written this logic inside this ng on init lifecycle hook, this method will get called only once. And at that time, the snapshot property will read the value of search query string and it will assign it to this search string property. But when we are clicking on this link, it has changed the query string in the route. But it is not going to call this ng on init lifecycle hook again. Because here we are not creating a new component. We have the same instance of the courses component. And this ng on init was called when that component was first initialized. After that, even though the value of the route has changed, in there the value of query string has changed, the component is not reinitialized. Right? So this ng on init will not get called again, and because of that, the value of the search string will still remain React because that's the value which we passed initially. So it will not change. Now, in order to overcome this problem, instead of using the snapshot property, what we can do is we can use an observable. So here I will comment these two lines, and now we are going to use an observable. And to use the observable again, first we need to access the currently active route, and we have that inside this active route instance. On that, we can call two properties, either query param map or query params. But I'm going to use query param map here because that is the latest feature which we can use in order to read the value of a query parameter. Query params, it is deprecated in the previous versions of Angular, but it still can be used. So let me show you both the ways. So first, let's try with query params, and then we will see query param map. And since it is an observable, we can subscribe to it. And to this subscribe method, we need to pass a callback function. And this callback function will be called whenever this observable is going to emit a new data. So basically, this query params observable, it is going to emit the currently active route whenever the route value will change. And we are going to get that value inside the parameter of this callback function. So I'll simply call it as data. Now, in order to read the value of the query param, all we have to say is data of and the name of the query string. So the name of the query string is search. And we can go ahead and we can assign it to search string property. And then we will have to write all these logic inside this callback function, because this callback function will be called every time the value of the query string changes. And every time the value of the query string changes, we want to check its value if it is undefined or if it is empty string or if it is null. We will show all the courses. Otherwise, we will filter the courses based on the new query string value and then we will display it. So now if we save the changes, let's go back to the web page. Let me go to home page. From there, let me search for React. So it is showing the React course. Now when I click on this show JavaScript course, you will notice that the query string value will change here, and based on that, the JavaScript course will be displayed, as you can see. In the same way, as I mentioned, this query params observable, it is deprecated in the older versions of Angular. So instead of using query params, we can use query param map. It is going to work in the same way. The only thing which we need to change here is that in order to get data from this query param map observable, since it is a map, we need to use get method here. So on this data, we can use get method. And to that, we need to pass the name of the query string for which we want to get the value, like this. And everything else will remain same. Let's save the changes. Let's go back to the web page. Let me again go back to home page. There I will search for node. So it is showing the Node.js course here. It has filtered it and it is displaying it. Now when I say show JavaScript courses, currently the value for the search query string is node. When I click on this link, it should change the search query string value to JavaScript and it should display the JavaScript course here. Okay, so this is also working. So out of query param map observable and query params observable, we should always use query param map observable because this is the new feature in Angular. Query params observable is deprecated in older versions of Angular. So in this lecture, we learned what is a query string, how to pass a query string in a route from the view template as well as from our component class. And we also learned how to retrieve the value of a query string. Now in the last lecture, we also learned about route parameters. So what is the difference between a route parameter and a query string? Route parameters are required and it is used by Angular router to determine the route. And they are part of route definition. If I go to app-module.ts, here for this route, we are specifying a route parameter. So this route parameter, it is a part of route definition and it is required. If we don't specify the value for this ID route parameter, in that case, the route will not work. But query parameters are optional. If the query parameter is missing in the URL, then it will not stop Angular from navigating to the route. And we saw that. Here, if I don't specify this query parameter, and if I press enter, we are still navigated to this courses route. If I specify the query parameter, for example, search equals something, maybe node, and if I press enter, then also it is working. But if we don't specify this query parameter, then also the route is working. But if we don't specify a route parameter, for example, if I say /courses/course, and if I don't specify the value for the ID route parameter, and if I press enter, you see we are redirected to 404 page. So that route parameter value, it is required. When we specify the value for the route parameter, based on that, it is going to display the result. So route parameters are required, but query parameters are optional. Query parameters, we also call it as query strings, they are just optional data which we pass through a route. If the query parameter is missing in the URL, then it will not stop Angular from navigating to the route because it is just some optional data which we pass with the route.